As the insurance industry monitors a shift in terrorism targets towards the loss of human life as opposed to property destruction, the future of the U.S. government's role as a financial backstop for these types of insured losses remains a key variable. AM Best analysts recently took a look at the considerations that insurers face with the Terrorism Risk Insurance Program Reauthorization Act set to expire in 2020. Here to discuss these findings are the authors of a recent Best Special Report, financial analyst Angelo Lozano and senior industry research analyst David Blades. So Angelo, the report touches on the different loss impact scenarios from terrorism that insurers currently face based on their size and scope. Can you briefly outline the issues at both ends of the spectrum?
Sure, Meg. The loss impact scenarios have changed over the years as the protection under TRIA has effectively decreased. And that does fall on a spectrum for large, medium-sized, and even small carriers. For large carriers, those as we classify as having surplus of $500 million or greater, they do have larger exposures. They seek out the larger risks, and they also look out for the trophy buildings and type. So they do have larger gross exposures, but they also have larger sources of capital. So when you look at that relationship between gross exposures to surplus, that ratio is smaller relative to small and medium-sized peers. Now, when you look at smaller and medium-sized carriers, the story does change slightly. They do have smaller exposures, but now those exposures are under what is the TRIA program trigger. And that program trigger today is $160 million, and it's scheduled to be $200 million by 2020. Just to put that in perspective, in 2002, that program trigger was just $5 million. So that's grown considerably over the years. So what are the implications of this? Smaller carriers are now less protected, and there is more use of third-party reinsurance. And what's interesting and what's an encouraging fact that we saw in our data, there is more use of third-party reinsurance, and we expect that to continue to be the case going forward into 2020. So we're going to expect that gap for terrorism risk to be closed a little more between now and 2020.
While the development of catastrophe bonds has provided a key lever for property casualty insurers, terrorism-related bonds have yet to achieve a similar status. Why might that be the case?
Sure. Terrorism-related bonds have not gained the status of natural catastrophe bonds for one simple fact, and it's lack of data. Whereas financial market and natural catastrophes offer ample amount of robust data and history, there's just not that level of data for terrorism-related bonds. So going forward, as more data continues to be built in and modelers continue to incorporate this, we expect more market acceptance in the future for terrorism risk.
So David, have insurers adjusted their product offerings and coverages as a result of the changing scope of terror attacks?
Yes, definitely, Meg. Modelers and insurers have definitely adjusted the way that they're looking at terrorism and modeling terrorism based on the changing nature that we've seen in the last 5-10 years, and definitely since TRIA was first introduced. Modelers are definitely updating their overall models from a deterministic standpoint, which is kind of the what-if look at terrorism events, also from the probability-weighted looks at terrorism events. And in addition, they're putting more resources into the overall geographic concentration risk and how they're looking at them. With regards to models also, they're more the sophisticated insurers are looking at more stochastic modeling, basically determining capital at different confidence levels. So definitely we've seen the models definitely being enhanced over time and definitely reacting to the changing nature of terrorism. Again, initially, terrorist events were basically focused on doing as much property damage. Now we've seen with the lone wolf attacks and or smaller groups, 1 or 2 people, person attacks. You've seen more of those focused on injury or loss of life type events, where you've seen even on a small scale strip malls and different places where people might gather. Those are the places that are being focused on in terms of those attacks. So the coverages that insurers are putting forth definitely have to address that sort of changing nature in terrorism.
So are there aspects of Tripura that the industry would like to see bolstered or clarified?
I think from that standpoint, I think maybe the one area I could think of is the coverage related to nuclear, biological, chemical, and radiation events, NBCR. Again, basically the way TRIA was formulated, NBCR events in the language wasn't excluded or included in that language. So what it did is it left it up to the states to determine, whether that coverage was, was excluded or not in those policies. And I think that's left, companies having to deal on a state-by-state basis and deal with the coverage that they're putting forth from that perspective. And I think more clarity around what's covered from an NBCR perspective, I think insurers and the overall industry, I think, would be more comfortable if there was just more clarity from that standpoint. I think there was definitely clarity given on a cyber, from a cyber terrorism perspective. In December of 2016, the Treasury Department basically clarified that TRIA or Tripura did include coverage for cyber terrorism, especially the individual cyber liability policy. So that was a positive in that regard. But I think the industry overall is still trying to get its arms around the nature of cyber, cyber risk and cyber terrorism. Obviously, as we become more connected as a world and as globally and obviously in the U.S., hackers just have more ways to get at us and to create terrorist type of events.
So Angelo, as the insurance industry awaits the extension of Tripura, where do insurers need to keep their focus today?
As TRIA approaches expiration, we'll be looking more and more to insurers' preparedness. As we've seen in years past, more and more lone gunman attacks are taking place throughout the U.S. in large or small cities. So we're looking at insurers of all sizes who are insured not just in Tier 1, but also Tier 2 and Tier 3 territories. So we'll be stress testing our companies more and more for terrorism risk, and we'll be looking closely at companies with over-reliance to TRIA. And the type of questions we'll be asking are, what kind of risk mitigation strategies do you have in place? More reinsurance, bolster of capital, or other methods? Please explain to us. So the key question will be, if TRIA expires, what is the company's plan?
And just building on that again, we mentioned preparedness being an important part. Also, companies developing business continuity plans. We want to hear about them as well when we're talking to them about their overall readiness for terrorism exposures. And in addition, I think we're looking at companies, as we look forward again at terrorism exposure that we're seeing now. It's not just property damage. Business interruption is a big thing. Contingent business interruption. So coverage for those exposures, as well as companies that are developing coverage for casualty exposures as well. So again, I think that's where we're seeing things develop into, given the changing nature of terrorism. That's again something that we'll focus and stress test the companies on as we continue to engage them in dialogue and conversation as we get closer to the expiration of Tripura in 2020.
David and Angelo, thank you so much for speaking with us today.
Thank you, Meg.
Thank you, Meg.
To view a copy of the report, visit ambest.com. For AMBest TV, I'm Meg Green.